BeMobius means to pause, to connect with your breath, to close your eyes for a moment and invite grace and gratitude, to check in with your abundant inner landscape and bear witness to what is real, but not necessarily true, to cultivate the practice of boundless self-compassion, which is your true nature.
To be Möbius means to be in balance, to be self-accepting and loving, to be integrated and forgiving, to be free of false notions, limiting beliefs and thoughts.
To be Möbius means to dialogue with yourself with an open heart and mind, to listen and to trust and to return again and again to this intention, and through this journey to live in wholeness. It feels to me, and there's such richness in the distraction, and distraction because like distraction from what, right? Like it's all vital. But there's this the fiery season, the summer season, that is kind of this ping-pongy energy, the massive reckoning that is happening in America right now around Black Lives Matter, around truth-telling, the like built up energy around COVID and having been home. Like there's this kind of, it feels like this kind of cosmic convergence of awe, and that is showing up as what like the Western scientist world would call distraction or ADD. But it's so rich, and it feels like such a privilege to be able to surrender to it and be like, and this and this and this and this. And what I've kind of landed in is like my path to creation is more circular than it is linear.
Your sharing is landing me in what came through one of my wonderful yoga teachers, Claudia, this morning in class, and her whole class today that she taught, all the teaching was really about cooling and stillness. And she talked a lot about what you're just describing, of how there's this kind of almost like a sweet spot of having enough of that fire that inspires, that creates, that allows for, you know, just that kind of almost like a enthusiasm, you know, like an enthusiasm, like that enthusiasm for that thing called life that's so vibrantly around us right now. Like that's so, like, you can't like avoid it. And having enough cooling, stilling of that expression so that there is enough integration, enough sense of like to really experience the vibrancy without it consuming you in a way that it depletes and burns, you know? So it's a really beautiful awareness that you're, for me to witness actually you describe that and embody that, which she, and you know, so the whole class was really about breath. It was really just all about our breath, and it was so much about like finding a way to move that fire and then to rest enough to be able to have just enough like just enough of that Rajic energy to like that energy that's just so that you're like inspired and enthused without being depleted and exhausted. What's always astounding to me is that's what soul friendship to me is about, because it transcends and somehow captures. And I don't know if you're feeling this, but like I land with you and you share with me an expression of where you are, and that is almost a continuation of an offering in a yoga class this morning by my teacher. Like incredibly how incredibly one there's this kind of a oneness in that. And I really believe this. I feel like right now more than ever before, and because there's such a um, forced pause on so many levels, and at the same time there's this kind of like constant distraction of like electronics and devices that at least I'm experiencing, and like noticing that element too, which she spoke to in a very beautiful way, because much as there is that easily distracted tendency, there's also what I'm hearing from you, the capacity to pause so that you're not necessarily going from one task in that circular fashion without losing a sense of the center. It's interesting you talked about the spiral and the circle, and I just wanted to name that because there is something to be said about distractibility that depletes energy, and that's just kind of like, and that infused, inspired distractibility that's more about staying centered and focused the in the intention of what matters most, and then moving from that into these different. It's like almost makes me think of the she mentioned that today as well in class, where if you think of like a tree, the trunk of a tree is solid, like it's, and then there's like all these branches that are like woo, like all over, and that's kind of what your expression of yourself right now feels like to me.
The essence to me of creativity and yielding to process, because there's some type of surrender that happens. You talk about this surrendered action. There's like this surrender to knowing how to do it, whatever it is, when it becomes a mystery to solve, or something to behold, or a creation to birth, or whatever it may be, that there is this kind of curiosity that replaces fear to say, what am I drawn to in this moment? What am I desiring? What colors? What, like the beauty. I love working on a project over time, and this BeMobius adventure that we're on has been that for me, for us, that there's been a surrendered action that we've been engaging with, that is, we have an intention, we have a direction, but the sort of elements that are going to cross our path within that time are going to dictate to some degree this thing that we're cultivating. Call that distraction, or call that intelligence. In my mind, there's some deep intelligence rooted in that ability to receive that which is in front of us, to behold what is crossing our path, and to actually integrate and incorporate the color, the musing, the daydream, the yoga class, the social activism, the quote on the wall, the tea leaves, all of it is like, there's something so much more rich about that way of moving through the world. Like, ooh, what is being asked of me today? When I put my feet down out of my bed, like, what are the treasures that I will uncover today if I'm open enough to receive them?
Judith Anodea, is that how you pronounce it? I hope I'm saying it right. So liberation and manifestation. Consciousness thus has a twin aspect. Its liberation, mukti, or formless aspect, in which it is as mere consciousness bliss, and a universe or form aspect in which it becomes the world of enjoyment, bhukti. One of the cardinal principles of spiritual practice is to secure both liberation and enjoyment. Shiva and Shakti can also be seen as representing two currents of energy through the chakras, one downward and one upward. The downward current, which I call the current of manifestation, begins in pure consciousness and descends through the chakras into the manifested plane, gradually becoming denser and denser at each step. Thus, we have taken our abstract conception, which began in thought, down through the chakras into manifestation. It is this path of manifestation that is said to be pulled by the enjoyment of life. The other current, called the current of liberation, takes us out of the limitations of the manifested plane into freer and thus more expansive and inclusive states of being. In this path, the energy in matter is released to become lighter and lighter as it moves up through the elements, expanding and transforming to a limitless state of pure being. Thus, solid earth loses its rigidity and becomes water, then the energy of fire, the expansion of air, the vibration of sound, the radiation of light, and the abstraction of thought. The liberating current is the pathway usually emphasized in the study of the chakras, for it brings personal liberation. It is the pathway through which slow-moving, constricted energy gradually gains new degrees of freedom. It liberates us from outdated or constricting habits, from the veil of Maya. It is the pathway through which we disentangle ourselves from the limitations of the physical world and find broader scope in the more abstract and symbolic level. Each step along the liberating pathway is a rearrangement of matter and of consciousness to produce more efficient, energy-rich combinations, a dissolution into our primary source. As this current originates below, it is fueled by the lower chakras, our roots, our guts, our needs and desire. To manifest, we must limit. This requires creating boundaries, being specific, defining structure and form. To write this book, I must have structure to my life and limit my other activities long enough to complete it. To hold a job, raise a child, finish school, or to create anything tangible, we must be willing to accept limitation. The liberating current brings us excitement, energy, novelty, while the descending current brings peace, grace, and stability. And in order for either of these pathways to really be complete, all of the chakras need to be open and active. Liberation without limitation leaves us vague, scattered, and confused. We may have wonderful ideas and lots of knowledge, but we are unable to bring these fruits to any tangible completion. On the other hand, limitation without liberation is dull and stifling. We become caught in repetitive patterns, clinging to security and fearing change. In order for us to be truly whole, both currents must be open and active. All that you've shared about your creative process and birthing the wings, I want to just land in that for a moment. Like, just beholding any kind of creative process. You know, I think I sent you pictures of those caterpillars that have been like munching, right? Like epic, right? So adorable. There's 3 of them. And just kind of watching that even process, like anything, there is an element of, landing in perseverance and having some form of like deep longing, this higher consciousness access, right? That just sort of says something is coming from something beyond me. And then I am going to prepare myself to receive this in this form. And then that preparation often, is where, to me, where I feel like God and the human merge. That preparation is really where God and the human merge. And I see that in the creative process, right? Like there's the wings come through you and you prepare your whole being to receive the manifestation of that source of divine beauty that flows out. And so that preparation has an element of defining your limits, prioritizing, whatever you may want to call it, right? Like that focus, that sort of like that almost kind of that centered distraction, that sense of like, okay, I am here I am, right? And so what does it mean to prepare? That's really been what's landing in my heart. Like, what does it mean to prepare to be in union, in mystical union for spirit, to manifest, to embody, to create, to love,
Yeah.
to revolt, right? To inspire. Like, it all has to, it only can be accessed when there's a deep willingness and then a preparation, and that's a constant practice. That's the practice. That's the rituals. That's the accessing sacred ancestral, like, like whatever those are, right? Like whether it's the Quran, whether it's the, whatever sacred texts there are, whatever prayerful rituals there are, whether it's like literally like thinking in terms of indigenous people and their capacity to like learn from nature and in reverence to those practices, like that preparation has so much to do with the practice. And right now, when I arrive in our BeMobius intention, what does it mean to be Mobius? To be Mobius means to pause. I mean, I almost feel like that is such the prerequisite to access, to preparation, right? Like without the stillness, without the moment of like that sort of delicious little thing that happens between the inhale and the exhale, where you're just like, notice that there's actually a pause before and after. It's very organically in our system. And to just stay with that, to me, is really, it's really revolutionary and yet so simple.
And that's been so true for me, is that when there's too much structure, when there's too much kind of rigidity, it gets stifled. It makes me feel really grateful for these expressions that are so ancient. Whether it's being in awe of a gorgeous 3 caterpillars in the backyard and watching them eat and watching them transform, or it's baking, or it's, looking at the curls in a friend's hair, like it's so necessary.
I feel healing is such a necessary part of why we're here on this earth in some ways. You know, I think we're here to heal ourselves, each other, the earth. I don't, there's something in the expression of creativity and healing, healing and creativity, creativity and healing. That's just keeps going back and forth in my heart, like I'm swirling with those two words, healing, creativity, and healing and healing. And why is creativity essential to healing? What is it about healing that creates a space for creativity to emerge? It's almost like they're so intertwined, right? Like there's just so much healing that happens through this process. And to me, that's just one more way of experiencing source, divine, God, spirit, and that notion of how when that speaks to sort of that manifestation that happens from sort of this pure consciousness that kind of then goes into the form and comes out in an embodied expression. What happens if we, for a moment or two or a day, what would it look like if we let go the rigidity and let go the need to control the outcome and just access source, to allow, to give ourselves permission to play, to prepare ourselves, to allow ourselves to be in a space of surrendered action, to sort of say, I'm just going to like tenderly allow myself to be that which I was before. You know, there was this beautiful Mary Oliver poem that I think I sent you this morning, right? And I love that image that she speaks to so beautifully, of that little baby bird that hasn't even opened its eyes yet. It doesn't even know that there's a sky. It has no idea that there are wings. Like all it knows is that it's just ready to like receive the nourishment from its mama. Like that image of like have no idea, right? So that spaciousness of like excitement and enthusiasm, of like that hunger for life itself, without all that taxing limitations of, you know, survival and being in it, right? Like the notion that creating art is a privilege, to me creating art is a necessity. It's almost like a way to heal and recover and prepare source to move through us, whatever that might look like, is one of the ways to navigate this epic apocalyptic time. If I'm not given this incredible space to witness my friend who's made choices in her life to not stay rigid and fearful in a place, but has done the tremendous, courageous heart work to say, I'm going to give up my little apartment that I loved, because in order for me to stay there, the choices I would need to make would make me super rigid and hard and tight. But I'm going to give this up, a hard choice, so that I can live in a more supple state of creative preparedness to allow source to work through me. It's about those centered choices of saying, how do I make tough decisions so that I remain supple and creative and available to source to do work through me, and not hardened and not rigid and not like, so that nothing flows through me, right? So I just want to bow with so much like reverence and like love for the courageous, brave artist soul, and just the mystic in both of us, the artists in both of us, those courageous, um, fiery beings that are working with spirit to say, we don't want to live with rigid, hardened hearts. We want to be supple and brave, and we want you to just work through us in this way, just bowing to the wings. So much love.
Thank you, Peej. Receiving that, reflecting it back. Yes to steady suppleness. Yes to creativity. Yes to the essentialness of creativity. Creativity is healing for me because it reminds me that I am alive. It reminds me that I'm a vital being who can make choices. It reminds me that I can create meaning out of my own reality. It reminds me that this being human is a dance between the visible and the invisible, spirit and human form. Creativity feels healing for me because it isn't willful in so many ways. It is kind of an opening, a surrendered action. To me, creativity, I think, is, like you say, prayer. Creativity to me in so many ways is prayer. It's visual prayer. And it is steady and supple. It is everything that is not mechanical. There's a fluidity that is present that does heal. It heals because it feels soul-centric. And tapping into that, the lake of the heart, the steady river of the soul, reminds me of the vastness of it all. So to me, creativity is healing because it is mystery, and it is it is sort of a dance between effort and non-effort, and curiosity over fear. It is it's essential to human meaning making, meaning making. And that's what Toni Morrison talks about in this, like the making of meaning, that art is, it's like clay that helps us make meaning of our reality. That's essential. It's not optional.
No, I have witnessed this in my own life. What happens when systems, structures, institutions of oppression block the access to beauty, block the access to art, and block, right? Like there's a reason why oppressive regimes and structures since the creation of Earth, right? We've seen that is a way to block source. It's the way to literally fight against spirit, to block that which is divine within us, right? There's a reason why the first thing the regimes do, or oppressive structures do, is try to shackle the artist and the poet and the actor, right? And the writer.
Totally.
It's just, it makes complete sense to my heart.
Totally, because the actor, the poet, the writer is questioning reality, questioning the status quo, shaking it, shimmering with it, dancing with it. I talked to Andrei about this a lot in his experience growing up being born in communist Romania and growing up in post-communist Romania, and talking to his parents, and just him telling me that, yes, poets were jailed, philosophers were jailed, artists were jailed, they were killed. because they were dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Toni Morrison writes, now for a very personal note. I do not want to go into my old age without Social Security, but I can. I do not want to go into my old age without Medicare, but I can. I'll face it. I do not like the notion of not having a grand army to defend me, but I can face that. What I cannot face is living without my art. Like many of you here with your own particular backgrounds, I come from a group of people who have always refused to live that way. In the fields, we would not live without it. In chains, we would not live without it. And we lived historically in the country without everything, but not without our music, not without our art. Bowing to her.
Totally. Yes, yes, and yes.
Love you, soul friend.
Love you so, so much.